campaign strategists, Bruce Hawker and Andrew Bragg, filling in for Graham Morris. Andrew is a former acting director of the Liberal Party. And Andrew, I mentioned earlier, you're also involved as directing the Libs and Nats for same-sex marriage campaign as well. We were hearing from Nick Greiner a little earlier on that, and I want to come back to it. But let's just talk about today's effort from the Prime Minister to shift the focus onto energy. He's been back at the Snowy Mountains, talking up the Snowy Hydro 2.0 scheme, announcing $8 million from the ARENA Renewable Energy Agency towards the feasibility study in this. Bruce, I might go to you first on this. Obviously, Malcolm Turnbull feels this is a political winner for him. Do you think it is?
Yeah, I'm a little bit uncertain about that, David, particularly when Paul Broad came out and said that any results from anything they were doing in the snow is going to take, what, 6 years, I think he said. So it's hardly...
It was quite a funny moment, actually, because it was the Prime Minister who, as he sometimes does, went into interviewer mode and said to him, "How long will this take?" And he said, "Well, actually 6 years, we think."
Former head of Snowy Energy, Paul Broad, not giving the answer he was expected. Look, I think this is a vulnerable area in certain, for certain states. South Australia, I thought the government in Canberra was quite effective in going in and making life difficult for Jay Weatherill, at least for a little while, over that issue. So it potentially is a winner, but it's a hot potato, because if the public starts to form the view, as they may well, that energy charges going up is in part because of the federal government policies, then they won't be very happy about that at all, and any strategy around that will have backfired. They have to be very careful about this issue. It's a bit like this asylum seekers one for Labor. It's potentially one that could backfire for them. That's my thinking about it.
Yeah, Andrew, I mean, the Prime Minister says it's a romantic notion, Snowy, and he's right. People do have a lot of fondness and nostalgia around the Snowy Hydro scheme and so on. And I think the idea of expanding this pumped hydro project, has a lot of merit to it. But it comes down to how much it'll cost us and when it will actually help us. And there's still a fair bit of doubt around those two pretty important questions.
Well, I think, David, at the macro level, energy policy is a very sad state of affairs. How we could be an energy superpower but have skyrocketing power bills, largely because of very poorly coordinated policy across the Commonwealth. And obviously it is biting people at the kitchen table. So I think wherever you can show that you can increase supply and ultimately reduce prices, that's a good thing. Of course, the trick is in the communication of that.
Yeah, and do you think he's getting that right? I mean, once again, we've seen him flying in a helicopter around the Snowies, and it's terrific engineering, no doubt about it, to see all those pictures once again. Yeah. But is this the way to do it?
No, I think it is good, because it shows that your commitment is to science above ideology. And of course, one of the problems we've seen in the States is that ideology is being put before science, and we've had crazy bans on onshore exploration of gas and renewable energy targets for no obvious purpose. So I think this is a tangible product and it looks pretty good.
Yeah, I think...
Now, on the asylum seeker one... Sorry, Bruce, you go.
I was just going to say, I think the gas issue is slightly different, and, the politics of that is fraught and plays out very badly for the National Party, where you see this weird coalition of Greens and Conservatives being opposed to what they see as being fracking and the dangers associated with that. So that's a different issue, and I think, though it is a big problem for Conservatives in the bush.
Yeah, and it plays differently depending on whether you live on or near land that's set to be fracked or not. Exactly. On asylum seekers, Bruce, this has long, as you know, been a vulnerability for Labor. Yep. So we now got this split over the issue of whether you put this cohort of asylum seekers, 60 or 70 of them, here after being brought for medical treatment, they've received it, they've been given the medical all clear, put them on a tougher visa that means you don't get all the handouts, you have to go and get a job. Labor says that's mean, it's cowardly, it's cruel, and so on, and the government seems to relish the prospect of a fight over this. Yeah. It'll open the floodgates now to people smugglers and so on. What do you think on this one, Bruce?
Yeah, well, at the realpolitik level, David, this is what I call a sucker ball. The government throws it at Labor and they try to swing at it, and often they miss. I think Labor really needs to stay away from the asylum seekers issue. Easier said than done, because a large part of its constituency does feel very, very strongly about the issue. But the overwhelming majority of Australians have spoken repeatedly on this issue, and they do not like the idea of people who have come via sea to Australia to be able to benefit in any shape or form from the way in which they came. And now we could argue about the rights and wrongs of that all day and all night, but that at the end of the day is where most Australians stand on the issue. Yeah. And I think Labor should be very, very careful about how it plays on this one. I think it was being put out there for one reason and one reason only, and that's to see if they can get Labor to react, because let's face it, it's 70 people. You know, it's not going to affect the budget in any shape or form. It's just there to see if they can provoke a response from Labor and then to create problems for them with the electorate.
Yeah, and worth pointing out, they actually would cost the taxpayer more if they were sent back to Nauru or Manus Island. They cost a fair bit to us over there as well. But look, on this question, Andrew, it seems to me it comes down to the framing of it. And certainly we read in the Telegraph today about, you know, these asylum seekers costing taxpayers more than age pensioners. One case where, you know, he apparently blew all the money on prostitutes and so on. I mean, most Australians go, hang on a minute, we can't have that. But if it was framed around perhaps those asylum seekers brought here because they've been abused, assaulted, maybe they've got little kids and so on, it's a different scenario, isn't it? I mean, how do you see this playing out?
I just think you can't be trapped into having exceptions ruling in the main here. We've seen what policies have worked and we've seen what policies haven't worked, and obviously having a hardline policy here has the support of the majority of Australians, but has also, of course, stopped those boats. And my view is that you can't have any cracks of light here, and every possible avenue should be closed down.
Will it get tricky though for the government if it does go to you know, putting mums or those who've been abused onto these tougher requirements? They have to go out and get a job. Will that become politically more difficult?
I don't think so.
Just stick with the hard line and
that's right.
Blanket rule for all.
That's right.
All right. Final one on same-sex marriage. And Andrew, as I said, you're involved in this, directing this Libs and Nats for Yes campaign. Tell me about how it's gone today with the video out there. Nick Griner's been out there, and others who are involved in this campaign. What sort of feedback have you had today?
Well, I think the objective here is to make sure that the millions of people that vote for the Liberal and National parties know that there is a very strong Conservative and Liberal case for same-sex marriage. And my feeling is that with a large amount of coverage today, that more people will know about those messages. So my sense is as long as we can keep on getting good people to speak for this cause, then that will be a good thing in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, Bruce, what do you think from a campaign point of view about this sort of approach? I mean, Labor probably doesn't need to do something similar, but it's the Conservative side that's divided on this. Will this have much impact?
Oh, I think it will. I think people in their electorates will look to senior people in the Liberal Party like Nick Griner, who definitely has that elder statesman role, and say, well, if leading Conservatives believe that it's appropriate to have gay marriage, then that makes it easier for me to make up my mind to do it. Now, I'm not sure that you're going to get too many people who are representing electorates in the bush taking that lead, but there will be some. But I think they've done a good job in getting Nick Griner out to make that case. I think it's disappointing, though, that Malcolm Turnbull hasn't really lent his support to the cause, because we know that that is what he really believes in, and it would be good if a Prime Minister and an opposition leader could stand shoulder to shoulder.
It is a little difficult for him to get too involved. I mean, I get your point. I just think it's a fine balancing act, isn't it, for the Prime Minister on this one?
I think it is difficult for him, but he's a fellow who, as we've said before, really lacks authenticity. People think constantly that he's really looking elsewhere for his guidance on these issues rather than to lead from the front. This would be an opportunity for him to come out and say, well, actually, I do believe in this proposition, and I'm going to support it vigorously. I don't think he'd lose too many supporters in the centre of politics if he were to do that.
Well, I mean, he does say, you know, whenever he's asked, that he absolutely supports it and why and so on. But Andrew, just a final comment from you on this. I mean, would you like to see him, boots and all, a lot more involved in the Yes campaign?
Well, I think you would have seen last night on commercial television that he made it very clear that he was in favour of yes vote. And my sense is there's a good amount of Liberal Party cabinet ministers and backbenchers, as well as branch members, that will be out talking about it vigorously.
Yeah, I don't think there's too much doubt about where Malcolm Turnbull stands, at least. We've got to go. We're out of time. Bruce Hawker, Andrew Bragg, good to talk to you both. Thanks very much. We'll catch up soon.
Cheers.
Time for a quick break and back with The Last Word.